Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Okay. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Buenas tardes, damas y caballeros. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Brian Ellsworth. I'll be the MC for today's event. It's a privilege to welcome you to On the Road to Originate to Share. This event will showcase a conversation about the evolution of IDB Invest's new business model. We will also unveil a groundbreaking deal, the first securitization focused on Latin America and the Caribbean with MDB assets for private investors. It's a milestone for IDB Invest. And that's because it's a major step in the transition to a business model focused on mobilizing private capital for scaling impact. This operation reinforces IDB Invest's role as a pioneer among MDBs in connecting global investors with development assets in the region. This afternoon, we'll have the honor of hearing from investors who worked with us on this operation, which will advance inclusive and sustainable growth in the region. Before leaving you with our guests, a couple housekeeping items. As today's program will be both in English and in Spanish, we have simultaneous interpretation devices available on your left. We appreciate your help in ensuring that all cell phones are silenced. For those of you following us online, thank you for joining us today. Please leave a comment in the chat. Now, on to our opening session, a conversation about Originate to Share. It's an honor to welcome on stage Ilan Goldfein, President of the Inter-American Development Bank, Ana Botín, Santander Group Executive Chairman, and Alexia Latortu, U.S. Treasury Assistant Secretary for International Trade and Development. Please give them a moment. Please give them a warm welcome.
So, thank you very much all for being here. For us, it's a special occasion. It's not only a deal, it's a new business model. And we have here at my side both Alexia, one of our shareholders, but more than that, one of the persons that gave more incentives. Can I call you the mother of the Originate to Share?
One of the godmothers.
Exactly. And one important part of the Originate to Share is about working with the private sector. And at my side, you have Ana Botín. You all know her, but for us, is a very important partner in terms of working in Latin America with the private sector. We have today what we are symbolically saying the beginning of the Originate to Share model. As you know, this model was part of a new business model that we have launched and we approved during our Punta Cana meeting where the governors, our governors, and that's the reason I was asking if governors, because we have our governors. She was talking about the governor of other country, but that's the central bank governor. For us now, governors is our shareholders. And they approved the new capitalization of IDB Invest, $3.5 billion, with a new business model. Today, we have announced what we call the first deal, a securitization deal. And this deal was with the help of one of our major private sector partners. So that's the reason we have the three of us here commemorating and actually looking forward to the future. Let me tell you, and I'm going to get to our hosts here, our invitees here, what we believe is important in the Originate to share. Part of what we understand is our mandate is to increase the scale of what we're doing. Increase the scale also by mobilizing private sector resources. That's a very important, I will say, mandate. That's something that we have been asked, has IDB, but has MDBs in general. When you originate to share, and you stay with just one part of what you originate, the other, let's say we stay with 5%, and the 95% you share, the other 95% are a way for us to mobilize resources. So that's number one. Number two, originate to share is different from originate to distribute, and James here, the CEO, and you're going to hear it, have taught me what is the difference, why we not call it originate to distribute, because if we share, we stay with the skin on the game. And that's important for us to be able to monitor, to be involved, but it's also a very important message and sign to whoever is coming with us. So it's important for us, but important for mobilization. And last but not least, part of the CAF recommendation is to have innovative instruments that you share risk with the private sector. And he is a model that shares risks. So today, with this new model, with new issuance, we are starting that. Something that this securitization deal is doing, at least for us, is that we can take more risk, because when you securitize, you save some capital. Saving some capital, you can lend more. The second part that is important is that when we securitize, we're not selling loan by loan. We are selling a package of projects. And that seems to be attractive to a range of investors. So this deal, we sold 100 million out of 1 billion securitized segment of our 10 billion portfolio. The multiplier, the best estimate we have, is 1 to 5. That unlocks an additional 500 million for new lending. And as I mentioned to you, all the time, we are more than just the volume and the number of dollars. It's about what we're doing. So our impact, we believe this transaction will generate 468 megawatts of renewable energy, 182,000 jobs, 61,000 women entrepreneurs. That's our targets and ambition in terms of what this deal will mean. So I've talked too much, and now I want to start with both of you. Let me start with Ana Botín. Santander is one of IDB's major partners in the region and knows Latin America very well. We're about development, IDB. How can we advance with you the development goals in the region?
So first of all, thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to be here. So thank you for inviting me. Yeah, Santander, as the #1 bank in Latin America, we're very much aligned with the IDB goals. We believe that development of the region is something that we can make a big contribution, and that working with the public sector, together we can help mobilize and scale our resources. And so that is incredibly important. If you ask me today, what I see as the biggest problem we have in the world is lack of growth. And Latin America has growth. And so I think it is our duty to work together in innovative ways to help, direct the resources, savings from Europe, from the US, from other parts of the world to the regions that have the demands for growth and development. On the other side, the other issue we have is, if I might say so, regulation has gone to an extreme that banks are no longer the best holders of capital. That includes the IDB, it includes banks like Santander. If you look at the European Union, lending from non-banks today is bigger than lending from banks. but we originate the loans.
So we both originate to share.
So it's exactly the same issue. For different reasons, we've built 300 basis points of capital. And again, we have been forced, because we don't get the returns for our shareholders that our shareholders expect, to build these models. And so what we can offer is a platform that we've built for the last 7-8 years. We placed 200 billion of our customers' loans with third parties, mostly private equities and private lenders that don't have the same capital requirements as banks. And this is a win-win. We can help our customers grow, and we get returns for our investors, which are better, which is what they expect. And we can, help accelerate growth. And so I think in Latin America, this is a huge need that we can together help to bridge. And one way, of course, is through direct originate to distribute. The other one is through guarantees, right? For projects that might not be marketable, where you can help them be marketable. So, again, we are very, very much committed to this vision, and we are very happy to support both the IDB and the government's goals of development.
So you mentioned some aspects that are relevant. First, we need to get growth. We know that one of our 3 main objectives at the IDB is productivity growth, and being able to grow. That Latin America has lost a lot of decades, and this is a way that we can push for more growth, and that's quite important. Of course, guarantees are something important, and we're working with guarantees, and this is exactly another instrument. We want to develop quite a bit of the new instruments, and that's relevant. But let me go back to Originate to Share. So, Alexia, you were one of the major champions of 2 ideas, that the private sector is the engine of development or growth. Second, that we need Originate to share. So tell me, how do you see these two now? How we are evolving? What is the potential?
Thank you so much, Ilan. It's so great to be here with you and also with Anna, because without Anna, there's no one to share with. So very happy to be here. And, it took a village, and I'm looking out at the audience, and I see so many members of the village that led to this very moment, which is indeed a very exciting moment. And, starting with your first question, although I think it's already been said, I fundamentally believe that the private sector will be the driver, the engine of that growth that Anna, you mentioned is vitally important. If you speak to young people across the different countries of this region, they want jobs. Most of the time, they're talking about private sector jobs. By the way, even the ones who want to be in the public sector need to understand the private sector. So irrespective, the private sector is important. And clearly, even today in all of our economies, the private sector is the largest employer, whether it's formal or informal. And so it's just so clear to me, and also aligns with my personal values of we owe it, so that every human being is able to have access to the opportunities to fulfill their highest potential. And for me, that's a really private sector kind of discipline. It's about the know-how, the discipline, as well as the job. So it's really quite fundamental. And the US has for a very, very long time believed that private sector is a key component to delivering on development. And then the issue is, how do we accelerate this in massive ways? And that's where the Originate to Share idea really comes in. Because the reality is, even though you, IDB Group, are doing a fabulous job in terms of trying to boost your own capacity, it will never be sufficient, given all the gaps and all the aspirations of countries in the region. And so this idea that you had, which to me is equally, if not more powerful than the 3.5 billion capital increase, which is a big deal, but the really big deal is that it was accompanied with this new business model and vision that said, we're going to truly, us, the development bank, put the private sector at the center of what we do. And it means leveraging the roles of different actors in the system to their best potential. The IDB group, IDB Invest, can originate the deals. You can find them. You can develop them. You can make sure they're well structured. You can make sure there's social value, the impact that you talk about, Ilan, all the time. And then the private sector is able to scale in ways that, development banks cannot. So this idea of not holding on to these assets and, with the pride of the fact that you found them and developed them, but that you're actually able to share them to the benefit of the countries is powerful. And I see many other MDB colleagues in this room as well, who I think are very eager to learn from all of you about this beautiful experiment and the promise of getting this right. And I think today's deal is really important, really will be palpable to people's lives. Much more lending goes out, many more jobs created, both sort of small and medium enterprise jobs as well as other jobs, doing more in riskier markets, doing more equity, doing more local currency. This is what's going to be possible thanks to the fact that you didn't only have a vision, but in Punta Cana, you translated that vision to get the consensus approval of your board of governors. And then today, there is reality thanks to Santander.
And you both mentioned something important. We need to access new sources of funding for development. There's just not enough resources in the public sector. And Anna, you mentioned that you're also accessing other sources. You're going to private equities, so we will not generate new sources. We need to reallocate from the sources that exist. It is the private equities, pension funds, others. So that's a part of the secret. We need to find ways to bring these new players into development. Anna, I want to ask you a question that for us is quite important. What do you feel that you need from multilateral development banks? IDB and others, what do we need? What do you need? You mentioned guarantees, yes. Anything else?
I have a long list.
Share it with us.
Let me tell you two really important things you could potentially consider adding to the Originate to share. So one seems a very obscure thing I'm going to ask, but it's really important and could help mobilize a lot of capital. And that is that banks are highly regulated entities, and there's something called the Basel Agreement.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we are facing in Europe is that when Basel gets interpreted by our European supervisor regarding third countries like Brazil, they apply judgment. And even though, and I have several examples, where Brazil is Basel equivalent, so they have translated Basel to the local financial market. However, the interpretation for a bank like Santander that's regulated in Europe is not the same as the interpretation made in Brazil. So I have several examples where my need for capital in Brazil is bigger than every other bank operating in Brazil, which means that I have to price up, I cannot compete effectively. That makes no sense. Again, that's restricting the access that Brazil has to European capital through ourselves. So that is, something which I think would be helpful. I'm happy to go more into that, but it's a bit technical.
No.
Maybe everybody here is bored by this, but it's very important. We've done the numbers, and in certain products, it's up to 30% more capital just because the way the rules are being interpreted by our supervisors vis-à-vis how Brazil has interpreted the rules for the local market.
Let me jump here because I think it's a very important, I know it's technical, and I've been at the BIS when
and you've been a central bank governor, right?
Yes, and we were discussing it. We are being asked to scale, to do more.
Right.
Budgets, national budgets are very tight. So we need to find ways of financing, and therefore we are talking about mobilizing profit. This is about interpretation of a regulation.
Right.
This is not about forcing voters or whoever political to increase their budget or decide. This is about how do we interpret some of the regulations that can scale For Latin America, billions of billions. So this is something we need to work, and there are several examples, and I'm working with SDRs issues, and I'm working on others, but this type of thing is very important. It looks very technical, but it's first order.
So you have governors that represent governments. This is a political issue. We're not going to solve that at the technical issue because the supervisors have their interpretation, they're not going to change it. It has to be a political decision where politicians that sit on your board talk to whoever they have to in Europe and say, if we have an Basel equivalent country, apply the same rules. Otherwise, you're restricting the access to capital in a very, I would say, subjective way.
We don't have governors, maybe we have directors of our board here.
It's a simple request, which is to be consistent with the Basel Agreement and with Basel-compliant countries that have gone through a process, respect that process, because that's what we all signed up for. I have another request or idea or suggestion, which is the green transition. So let me see how I put this.
We are among friends, so.
Yes, but when there's more than 3 people in the room, it's like everybody, okay. So,
and you are in a Latin American Caribbean institution, so 2 is enough.
Sympathetic, right? Developing countries cannot be expected to transition at the same pace as developed countries. To apply the rules that we apply in Europe to Latin America in terms of the transition is not fair. To say that Argentina, to tell a European banks, it's really soft power. It's not a rule, but soft power works, as you know, with supervisors, right? So, Argentina has a big gas development called Vaca Muerta, where there's a lot of gas. The country needs the gas for development. And you know what? We're rich in Europe. We have a lot of savings. We're happy to finance. But it happens that these are very long-term developments. And happens that some of the companies, there's also shale gas, and there's all sorts of issues where we are being pressured not to finance certain, gas developments. By the way, this happens in Africa too for the French banks, with Senegal, with gas. So maybe one potential avenue is for the regional development banks to say, okay, so let's take Argentina, Latin America. Argentina has a transition plan that is consistent with what the country can do, and they're taking the steps, and therefore, we should be happy to allow European banks to finance gas, even though it might be a 30-year commitment, which goes beyond the 20 years that we're expected to finance gas in Europe. You know that certain governments in Europe cannot buy gas for more than 10 years. Nobody sells you gas in short term because they want long-term contracts. So this is a very, very real issue of today that is happening. And again, the multilateral development banks could help the private sector banks in Europe, because why do we yield to this soft power? Because if we don't, we have the risk of having capital add-ons, maybe not now, but in 1-2 years. And because it's happened before, we say we're going to be careful because we have accountability to our shareholders. So that's another area where multilateral banks could be super helpful. And again, transition. Let me give you another example which might seem unimportant. All European banks, this is a long list, by the way. I'm going to give you one example. There's something called the green asset ratio. Anybody here hear about that? Put up your hands. Okay, 2 or 3. So the green asset ratio for European banks is defined as follows. Okay, you put on the numerator, you put all the European-only green assets. So if I finance renewables in Mexico, Brazil, that's not going on the numerator. Makes no sense, right? But on the denominator goes everything else. So if you don't look good in that green asset ratio, you're going to be, again, it's soft power. But this is how it's been defined by the European Union. Again, this is the kind of thing that I believe the IDB could help, because, okay, we might have to publish that ratio, but maybe we can publish it in another way that is equally valuable for the supervisors. So, and the list is quite long. So again, all these on the one side regulations, other it's most the soft power that is driving the banks like us to not finance very important development projects in Latin America. And as I said, in Africa, it's the same story. Huh? It's not just, here we had the IDB. And I do think multilateral institutions have a potentially role in that. I don't know if it's a...
We take ourselves as a Latin American Caribbean bank that has the role of being a bridge. We have 48 members, 16 of them are from Europe. So we believe that we can bridge. I don't know where this conversation will lead us, but we can certainly talk about it with our shareholders and see what are the issues. Things that are interpretation of regulations, things that can facilitate.
Right.
Of course, there are issues that are more principles,
right,
and that will be more difficult for us to deal. But the issues that we can solve, that we can preach, that are interpretation things, I think we can take this role. Talking about this role, Alexia, we have now the MDBs all having these reforms. There's a World Bank, evolution. How do you see going forward this thing that we are working here in the more broad agenda of MDB reform?
Yeah, thanks for that. And by the way, I've never been so glad I'm not a regulator or a supervisor. No, it really is at the heart of the ambition behind MDB evolution. Because the way that the IDB group approached Originate to Share, number one, it was an IDB group exercise, right? So IDB Invest, obviously James, Rachel, the full team, did an incredible leadership job, but they always recognized that to deliver on this, they really needed to work closely with the rest of the group.
Yeah.
They needed the public side, because I always say you need a strong public sector to have a strong private sector. And so you need the public side to do its job of providing the infrastructure that's needed, whether it's the energy, whether it's the roads, and all other types of infrastructure. You need the public side to work with the countries to have the right policies be put in place. And that, I think, you understood right away, and that's very much in the spirit of evolution. There was also a clarity that as you work on Originate to Share, you need to push yourselves in all the ways that you work with the private sector. So you were talking about the different instruments, Anna, and there was a lot of time spent on, can we do more equity and what will it take? How do we help develop local capital markets? How much more can we push ourselves to do more local currency or find ways to help mitigate foreign currency challenges, as you're doing with Eco Invest in Brazil? So that was very much part of the conversation in terms of being a more effective partner to the private sector. So it wasn't just a narrow, we have a model, Originate to Share, but you really sort of looked at it very, very holistically. And in my view, very importantly, you also looked at the other tools that are not just financial instruments. So you looked at the role of data. And I'm really proud that there was a release of more data with GEMS recently, so that the recovery rates and the default rates of all the decades of experience that you have is now more public. And that will also give more comfort, I hope, to private investors. It's also about the incentives that you set for yourselves, and I'm speaking here to the IDB group staff, to really shift your culture so that the model that puts the private sector at the heart, at the heart of the model, it's also the cultural and mindset change, that your jobs are not just to spend your own balance sheet, to deploy your balance sheet, but to really figure out how fast you can share with the private sector. So I think it really touches on all elements of MDB evolution, from the vision to the incentives, to the operational model of how you work, and ultimately the financial capacity to deliver impact.
So thank you very much. I am mindful of our agenda, our crazy agenda this week. Both Anna and Alexia came running, and I'm sure this is also true for the next couple of hours or more. So thank you very much for being here. I would like to thank our staff for originating this panel and you for sharing the panel with us. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Muchas gracias.
Mándame la lista de
Te
todo.
voy a mandar la lista.
That was good. Thank you.
Thank you. Very good.
Thank you, President Goldfein, Executive Chairman Botin, and Assistant Secretary Latortu for that enlightening conversation. As you know, MDBs are essential in creating innovative financial solutions that connect development assets and global investors. We will now continue with our second panel, a new MDB asset class. Our panelists will discuss the securitization deal and the opportunities this type of operation can create for investors interested in Latin America and the Caribbean. Please welcome on stage James Scriven, CEO of IDB Invest, Jeff Abramson, Underwriting Manager at AXA XL, Molly Whitehouse, Managing Director at New Market Capital, Michael Silas, Head of Global Credit at Axis, and Rachel Roboy, Chief Risk Officer at IDB Invest. They'll be right with you.
Hi, everybody. Do you hear me? I'm also happy that I'm not a regulator, so we can continue this conversation. You've all been introduced, so I won't repeat the kind words, but a big moment to thank all of you for coming. This is a very proud moment. And we wanted to take advantage to hear the concept of who we're sharing MDB assets with, and also the mastermind behind this deal, Rachel, who's our CRO, that we're going to go through all these conversations together. So as you heard from President Ilan, Ana Botin, and Alexia, this is a new business model. This is one of many deals that are going to the market. We thought about this concept of securitization to crowd in, not only release capital, that we refer to that, but more importantly, create an asset class in which investors are coming. This concept came about of many people that came from the private sector, some of them that came from Santander, that introduced this concept within IDB Invest. And we won't stop until we reach Ana Botin's $200 billion of assets mobilizing, so we've got a lot of origination to do. So with that, Jeff and Michael, you're both very active in the credit insurance and SRT markets, and probably you need to say exactly what SRT is. This transaction, however, was not your average deal, and it was a mirror of our portfolio, having exposure to 20 countries in Latin America and the Caribbean and 10 different sectors. What were the lessons learned on working on this kind of deal and the advantages and challenges of working with a multilateral development institution?
Well, I'm happy to start. And first of all, thank you to IDBI for inviting us into the transaction. We're really thrilled to have been able to participate. I think in general, this was just a very happy marriage for us of our strategic partnership with MDBs that has really been part of our ethos of our group for more than a decade, with the type of structure that we've seen used very successfully in the private sector to sort of effectively recycle and optimize capital management. And as I said, we could not have been more happy to see the opportunity presented to us. And I think we're able to quickly get comfortable with it based on a lot of the advantages that we have typically seen in our partnership with MDBs and IDBI in particular on individual transactions. And that is, the quality of your origination and underwriting, loan administration and supervision. Certainly doesn't go without saying the inferred preferred creditor status that can certainly help in stress scenarios, and our longstanding track record on individual transactions. So I think for us, the transaction looked and felt very familiar. And as a result, I think we were, able to very quickly get comfortable, and we're pleased to be able to engage with you. And as I said, we really hope this can be a model for future transactions. Not only for multilaterals, but for DFIs and the ECA community, which have also been sort of part of our larger public sector strategy. And as I say, these partnerships have been fundamental for us. I think reflective of that is the fact that our CEO of AXA XL, Scott Gunther, is here. Thank you, Scott, for joining us. This is very important for us and really fundamental to the success, I think, that we've had in the credit insurance space.
Great, thank you.
So for Axis, we've been very focused on MDBs as a customer base for decades. SRT is an important asset class for us as well. To marry those two together was a very quick thought process. So the challenges, specifically to your question, what was more challenging than traditionally? So this portfolio brought an obligor concentration, which you normally don't get in commercial banks. So there were some issues around that. Traditionally, you get single country for SRTs. This was, as you say, multi-country, and some of them were non-traditional or had more challenging issues to deal with. Thankfully, an MDB helps resolve that. And then the other challenging aspect is that there was multiple asset classes within the pool. Most of the time for SRTs, you get single country, single assets. So this brought some challenges around the modeling process, around how those different asset classes operate together, correlate together in different countries. So for us, those were the things that jumped out at us. Given the appetite for SRT, the appetite to support our MDB clients, this was frankly a very smooth process, and I'll give compliments. That's down to two institutions. One is IDB Invest and your entire team, and the other is Santander and the great team that they put together to support this effort. So I just want to say that.
Thank you very much for those comments. Molly, this is the second deal that you've done with MDBs. Tell us a bit about your experience in the first one, but more importantly, this experience many years later, of how was the process, why did you decide? You were talking just now, you were telling me that you had to actually explain to the outside world what an MDB was really meant. But if you could just share that experience with the audience.
Sure. So for those who don't know, we had done a transaction with the African Development Bank in 2018, and we're very proud of it. It was a wonderful achievement and a first-of-its-kind transaction. But since then, there has been so much progress, and I don't want people to sort of hear that date and think, oh my goodness, we're going to have one every 6 years. There was a global pandemic in between. People turned to other topics. And so I think that this is in part a very exciting deal in terms of reigniting that momentum across the multilateral space for engaging private sector investors in balance sheet optimization and the importance of that. You know, also that was the first of its kind. So the rating agencies had a very high-level approach to their ratings of the development banks. And so incorporating something very technical and very specific like a securitization was a challenge at first. And I'm really excited about the increasing clarity, and I'm hoping that there will be even more so, and not just from this transaction, but from information like the GEMS database, which I think really supports what we see, which is a very high quality in terms of the underlying lending. But to your point, I mean, when we originally did it, you know, Many large institutional investors are not as familiar with multilaterals as we might think in this room. We just assume it, you're living and breathing it, and with the quality of lending in certain emerging economies that takes place through those institutions. And for me, it's been a very exciting journey in that education for those institutions, because I sit here today as New Market Capital, but our underlying investors are all large institutional investors across Asia, the Middle East, Europe, the Americas, and it's been really important for us to educate those large institutional investors about the multilateral development space and all the important work that's being done there. And so I'm happy for the development in the rating agencies. I think it's also super exciting to engage different types of investors in terms of our colleagues here on the unfunded side, and certainly an ongoing education with large institutional investors. And having that role also be one that's a very different place in the capital stack is super exciting for me. And the idea that the private sector is not just engaging in like a AAA bond issuance, but in fact that there are private sector investors willing to take this position, I think sends a really important message, because if it's always private sector investors feeling insulated, that sends a message to the market that the loans are risky.
Thanks, Anna. And when our governor for the US was just referring to when we went to Punta Cana for a capital cruise, we had no idea we would be doing this, for all honesty. And it was an enormous learning process. And I wanted to ask Rachel to share that learning experience, but also, as I see our friends and colleagues from the African Development Bank, a big thanks to you, because we wouldn't be here if we wouldn't have reached out to you to understand what you're doing. So thank you very much, and thanks for joining us. Rachel, this has been an incredible learning experience. For me, it was. I'm sure for you as well. Tell us how this came about, how this concept started, and also what are the objectives behind that? We've talked a lot about building a new asset class, but what does it mean for us in terms, partly in pricing, but more importantly in capital relief and the consequences of that for a multilateral system?
So first of all,
for those, obviously you heard, Rachel Roy is our Chief Risk Officer.
So as a true CRO, I brought my notes, right? And I just want to take a second on a personal note. And for those of you who know me, I have two children, a Panama Canal, and $1 billion securitization. So this for me and for us as
and a dog.
Oh, and a dog. This for me and for the institution is a milestone. And it's a first on a journey. And I want to thank our investors for what I know is the beginning of a journey. And we already heard the president say, this is the first securitization in our region for private investors. And when they told me that, I said, are you sure? Please check again. Are you sure? And the answer, they tell me, is that it is. So this is the first on a journey. And I think, James, as you mentioned, it is a journey. I also want to take a moment, because our team is here, and thank our team. It has been an incredible experience, and I can talk a little bit more about that. And also, James, people ask, how did we do it? I have to thank you, because one of the reasons that we were able to do this as a team is because as CEO and senior management, we're able to foster a culture of innovation and, yes, even taking risks. Mm-hmm. And so when I talk about taking risks, this is not a game. This securitization of $1 billion is 10% of our book. This is the real thing for us. So when they say you go big or go home, that's what we did. We wanted to show how important capital optimization is for us, and at the same time, how important it is to crowd in the private sector. In terms of capital optimization, actually, Molly, you touched on a good point, which is actually the rating agencies. So when you ask me, James, how much capital did we save, how much new lending, it depends on who you're asking. Mm-hmm. If you ask me, I'll tell you one number. If you ask S&P, they'll tell you a number. They'll tell you another number. If you ask other rating agencies, they'll tell you a different number. And so for us, when you heard the previous panel talking about also regulation, for us it's equally important as we build this instrument and the MDB asset class that we bring the stakeholders alongside of us. They need to understand securitizations and SRTs, and also the risk and diversification. And we've been working very well actually explaining who we are to investors and also to rating agencies. What I can tell you is that the capital savings in this transaction will allow us, so with the $100 million of mezzanine tranche that was purchased by our investors, we are able to lend an additional $500 million. And that's real money because, as you will note, IDB Invest is one of the most constrained MDBs at this time in terms of capital. So this transaction comes at a critical moment for us. So thank goodness we got $3.5 billion of a capital increase, but this transaction couldn't have come a moment too soon, because while we wait for that capital to begin to come in and come in over a period of time, we were approaching and are approaching full capital utilization. So this transaction really does release capital for us to continue to contribute to development in the region. And my other part, when you asked me, so why we started to do this, because I was tired of everybody fighting over the small amount of capital that we had. So I said, so how can we do this? And we've learned a lot along the way as well. So many of our colleagues in the previous panel and also now have talked about some of the lessons learned. But for me, it was interesting, and for us at IDB Invest, to start to understand our market. And is there appetite? What kind of appetite? And to move, to also try to crowd in new types of investors. And so what was very interesting is it is true that there's a whole series of investors and investor classes that don't know about MDBs. They don't know about our strong performance. And so that was part of the learning. And also they're very interested in the diversification that these instruments can provide, because they don't always have ready access to emerging markets, especially by MDBs. So by the time we were done educating and really opening our doors, it was a two-way street to learn what the investors needed, but also what we needed to provide. And so the help of our advisors, who I also want to thank. The other point there is, by the end of the conversation, many investors were saying, I'll take the whole piece. I'll take the whole piece. So proof of concept for us. And the other thing I wanted to talk about was it took the whole institution. This transaction for us, in terms of how we're learning, it's not just a risk transaction or a mobilization transaction. Our finance department, our back office, our impact area, because the investors were caring about what are they investing in, what do the underlying assets consist of. So in terms of our learning, it really is an institutional change and an institutional project that securitizations such as this have to require.
Thanks, Rachel. So I'll ask one more question to each of the panelists, and because I know I'm between you, the panel, and cocktail. So we talk a lot about senior securities, AAA, but what you have in front of you are ones that are in the mezzanine tranche, taking much more risk than the AAA securities that we have above that. So knowing that you operate in this risky market, my question relates to how did you approach this deal, different from any other commercial lenders that would be selling you assets? And what's the potential that you see? Because in the audience, you not only have investors, but you also have the MDB community. What's your message towards them, towards the appetite that you have and you all have in this market? If we can go this way.
Sure. Yeah. No, I think on the first part as to how we approach and get comfortable with it, relative to partnering with commercial banks, I think the reality is we wouldn't do something like this with a commercial bank. As I was alluding to before, we take great comfort from organizations like IDBI's knowledge of their market, cultural, language, the business community. So that's really meaningful to us in terms of underwriting. And then, you say, yes, we're taking certainly a riskier position than maybe institutional investors traditionally look for at that AAA range. But for us, thinking about where we sit in the capital stack, this is very comfortable for us and very reflective of sort of our overall portfolio risk. I think one of the great advantages of these SRT transactions is they really allow sort of calibration of risk reward for investors. And I have to say, it's still a little disconcerting to be referred to as an investor. For me, we're credit insurers, and we're really thrilled that the MDB community has sort of realized that there is value in this unfunded protection. But for us, we're really able to come in at that sort of senior mezzanine part of the capital stack. We've built some internal modeling capabilities that allows us to we think, price accurately and judge the risk reward. And again, this is really kind of down the fairway for us. So, given all that, you talk about the future opportunity set, I think it's tremendous. I mean, as I said, I think these, the education piece certainly for the market, talking about your investor community or for institutions to develop the capability to do this, I think is certainly a challenge. But if we can address that challenge, I think there is a tremendous opportunity, and I suspect you'll find others besides Michael and I that will sort of be up here in the future.
And your CEO is listening to you.
That's right. That's right. So good plug for the business. That's the idea.
Molly?
Gosh, I feel like the sky's the limit. We're really just getting started. This is the second ever. It's the first post-pandemic, first in Latin America, and there's so much that can be done. I feel really excited. I know that a lot of other institutions are looking at similar transactions, and I just hope that this is the spark that gets things going, because I do think that it's a really unique opportunity for the private sector to get to partner with multilaterals. I won't. We could spend the entire time up here talking about the value of partnering with the multilaterals, but I think that there's much, much more that can be done. Managing capital, managing single name concentration risks. As an investor, we're able to do the structuring and loan by loan underwriting, so we're comfortable in that very low mezzanine position. And so I just think there's a lot more to be done and would encourage other institutions to do the same.
Thanks.
As to, for us, comfort with where we are, so Molly is lower than us in the stack. So their investors are taking different risks than what James and I have done.
That's true.
So our appetite is we can do a lot of this at where we sit. So that's one thing. And two, it's actually a good thing, because as you think about funded investors, the further up they go, the more it can be more challenging for them to do it. Where if for us, where we have a different cost structure, and so it can be for these more risk remote layers, unfunded. There's some advantages there. So that's that point. So on the where does this go? So for us, SRT is an important tool. We've heard how impactful it can be. And so we're very interested in developing a portfolio of SRT risk. Part of that, most of that, will be developed markets exposure to use our IDB clients to gain emerging market exposure via this SRT tool is the way to do it. So we are interested in other emerging market SRTs from the main MDBs. That is quite sensible. And so I'm a big fan of the transaction, and with where we're sitting, we can do this at scale, to borrow your phrase.
Thank you. Rachel, final thoughts?
Final thoughts. I think in terms of where we're headed is, I think, James, as you said, trying to build an asset class for MDBs. And I think that we talk about the MDBs as an ecosystem, and it's truly evolving to be an ecosystem. So the AFDB has been very generous, and we've learned from them. We've already begun sharing our learning with other MDBs. And transactions may take different shapes, different forms. Maybe because of the investors and appetite, we could have different investors taking different pieces of the capital stack. So will we sell seniors? Will we do more subordinated? I think absolutely. And I think there is more to come. And I'm just thrilled that this is truly all the stars aligned for us as we're on the road to originate to share. And I think it couldn't have come at a better moment.
Thanks. So I'd like to share or close with a few thoughts. We heard from our president, from Anna Bodin, from Alexia, the importance of creating a new asset class, because the MDB world can only finance the sustainable development goals through billions of dollars. If we want to get to the trillions of dollars, we need to bring international and local capital markets. What I've learned over more than 20 years of working in the MDB space is the MDB has very good assets. It's an amazing origination machine. Publicly now, you see those data points to the GEMS database, where you see that our track record as an MDB world is much better than commercial banks. I'd love to say it's our structuring capabilities, but it's also our preferred credit status. It's a number of things. And the only way we can scale this up is us being less of an investor and more as a conduit. About a year and a half ago, our board was asking this question: what is this change in model? And we invited a group of people to our board to have a discussion with the board directly on what does this model, what happens if we change our risk appetite framework. And during that session, a few concepts came up, but I wanted to leave you with one. How many of you have seen the film Field of Dreams of Kevin Costner? You remember at some point in time he heard a voice that said, "Build it and they will come." And it was a basketball stadium, baseball stadium, baseball stadium. That's what we're trying to do over here. We're convinced, we're obsessed that if we build an asset class, it'll be a game changer for channeling financial investments into emerging markets. So with that, it's been a real pleasure, a real honor to be over here hosting you all. And we've got, I think I'm not allowed to say that we've got cocktails out, but it's been a real pleasure. And thank you all for joining us.
Thanks to our distinguished panel for this conversation. Let's give them another round of applause. This concludes today's live stream. Thank you to our